Mafia boss noticed bruises on his black maid. What he did shook the city. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Nia Carter had never expected to be noticed. As the youngest and only black maid in the Romano estate, she was used to blending into the background. The mansion was a fortress of marble and gold, and the family that lived within its walls, the Romanos, were just as formidable as the structure that housed them. They were powerful, untouchable, the kind of people you didn't ask questions about. For Nia, her place was simple: serve, stay quiet, and never attract attention. However, it was in that very silence that the cracks began to show. Nia had been cleaning the massive dining room when the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Dominic Romano, the notorious Mafia boss, had entered the room. He wasn't just any man. He was the man who controlled everything, his presence as heavy as the oak doors he walked through. His sharp features and cold blue eyes scanned the room, as usual, with an air of dominance. Nia kept her head down, clutching the feather duster a little too tightly, as if it could shield her from his gaze. As she worked, her thoughts remained focused on the task at hand. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something that stopped her in her tracks. Dominic's gaze shifted to her, not with the usual indifference, but with a deep, penetrating focus. It was as if he noticed her for the first time in all the months she had been working there. Nia quickly lowered her head, but not before she saw the shift in his expression. He had noticed the bruises on her arm, barely hidden by the sleeve of her worn uniform. They were dark, ugly marks from the last time her situation had gotten out of hand, but it wasn't something she had ever expected anyone to care about. Her heart skipped a beat as Dominic's piercing eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Nia couldn't help but feel a rush of panic. She was sure he would dismiss her, as everyone else had done before. But then, to her surprise, he didn't. Instead, he motioned for her to come closer. A chill ran down her spine, but she obeyed, cautiously stepping forward. As she approached him, she felt the weight of his gaze on her, his eyes scanning her as if seeing beyond the surface. "You're hurt," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft. Nia froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined the Mafia boss would notice, let alone say something. His words felt like an anchor, heavy with something she couldn't quite place. She opened her mouth to respond, but found no words. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with unspoken tension. Dominic, for the first time, lowered his gaze to her arm, where the bruises were still visible, no longer hidden by the fabric. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "Who did this to you?" His question was calm, but there was something beneath it, something that made Nia's heart race. She had never thought to speak of it, never thought it would matter to anyone. She had accepted her life, the silent pain that accompanied it. But here, standing in front of him, everything seemed to shift. Nia's mind raced. Should she lie? Should she pretend it didn't happen? But something in Dominic's eyes told her it wouldn't be that simple. She hesitated, unsure of what to say. But before she could find her voice, Dominic stepped forward, his hand gently reaching for her arm. "You're not going to hide this from me anymore." His words were not a command, but a quiet promise. Nia felt something stir in her chest, a flicker of hope. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged her pain, the first time someone had cared. And in that moment, Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss, wasn't just a cold, calculating man. He was something else, something she never expected. He was someone who might actually understand. And that, in itself, was enough to make the world feel like it was about to change forever. I could feel the weight of Dominic's gaze as he stood there, looking at me like I was something more than just a maid. For a moment, I thought I might faint under the intensity of his stare. But then, he spoke again, breaking the silence that had stretched between us like an eternity. "You don't need to hide it, Nia," he said, his voice steady. But there was an underlying softness that made my heart beat a little faster. I had always been invisible, a shadow in the house, and now here I was, standing before him, exposed. The bruises, the pain, the years of silence. Everything felt like it was finally being acknowledged. I didn't know what to say. I had never thought someone like him would care about someone like me. He had power, influence, and a life so far removed from mine that I felt as if I were living in a different world. But there he was, standing before me, his eyes softening as he watched me carefully. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure, but the weight of his words had already shattered the walls I had so carefully built around myself. He wasn't just noticing the bruises. He was noticing me. It was something I had never allowed myself to believe, that someone could see me for who I was, not just as a maid, but as a person. I don't want you to be afraid anymore, Dominic continued, his voice low and steady. You're not alone in this. I felt something inside me crack. The years of silence, of suffering in the shadows, came rushing back, but now, there was a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that things might be different. You don't have to keep this to yourself, Nia, he added, his eyes searching mine for a sign, a hint that I might trust him. I was shaking, but not from fear. It was something else, something deeper. It was the recognition that someone cared enough to ask, to see beyond the surface and ask the questions that no one had ever bothered to ask before. I took a deep breath and nodded, the tears that had been threatening to spill finally coming to the surface. Thank you, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Dominic's expression softened even further. He didn't say anything more, but his presence in that moment was enough. He didn't need to say the words that I had longed to hear. His actions spoke louder than anything he could have said. For the first time, I didn't feel like a burden or an afterthought. I felt seen. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't alone. The moment stretched on, but I couldn't bring myself to look away from him. It was as if everything that had been broken inside me was being slowly mended by his simple acknowledgement. He was a Mafia boss, feared by everyone in the city, but here, with me, he was just a man who had noticed something that no one else had cared to see. The bruises on my skin didn't define me anymore. What defined me now was the small seed of hope he had planted in my heart, a hope that things could change, that maybe, just maybe, I could have a life beyond the shadows. The next few days were a blur. Nia tried her best to keep up with the work, to blend in, as she always had. But something had changed. Dominic had seen her, truly seen her, and that was something she couldn't just forget. It was a quiet, unsettling feeling, like the ground beneath her feet had shifted, but she wasn't sure if it was for the better. She went through the motions of her daily routine, cleaning the massive rooms, making sure everything was in place, but in the back of her mind, all she could think about was that moment. The way he had looked at her, not with the usual indifference, but with a kind of understanding. She couldn't get it out of her head. It wasn't just the bruises that had caught his attention, it was her. It had to be. There was no way someone like him would care about someone like her unless there was something more to it. But why had he noticed her? Why had he cared? Those questions lingered, unanswered. And still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Dominic had given her something she hadn't even realized she needed. Hope. The hope that maybe she could break free from this life, this cycle of silence and submission. But even as that hope grew, she couldn't help but feel a sense of doubt creeping in. Was she imagining it? Was she reading too much into his words? She couldn't let herself get carried away. After all, he was the Mafia boss, the most feared man in the city. He could have been simply reacting to the situation, doing what he thought was right. Or maybe it was just his sense of duty, his need to control everything and everyone around him. But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself that it was nothing more than that, the thought of his kindness stayed with her. A few days later, as she was finishing up her work in the kitchen, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. It was Dominic. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with those piercing eyes that seemed to see through everything. Her heart raced in her chest, and she could feel her palms beginning to sweat. She had hoped that maybe he'd forget about her, that it had all been a passing moment, a moment of sympathy. But as he stepped closer, she realized that wasn't the case. "Nia," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've made arrangements for you. You're going to see a doctor." Nia's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but it wasn't this. "I don't need a doctor," she replied quickly, shaking her head. "I'm fine." But Dominic didn't seem to care. "No, you're not," he said simply. I'm not going to ignore what's been happening to you. You need to take care of yourself. There was no room for argument in his voice, and Nia knew better than to try. She didn't understand why he was doing this for her, why he was going out of his way to make sure she was okay. But somehow, she didn't feel like she could refuse. He had already shown her a kindness that no one else had ever offered. And now, it seemed, he was giving her a chance to take care of herself, something she had never been allowed to do before. As he turned to leave, he paused in the doorway, looking back at her. This is not just about your physical health, Nia, he added, his voice softer now. It's about your well-being. You deserve better than this. Nia felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She had spent so long living in fear, in silence, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be treated with respect, with care. But now, standing in front of her, Dominic Romano was showing her a kindness that felt almost foreign. Thank you, she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Dominic gave her a small nod, his expression unreadable, before turning and walking away. As he left, Nia stood there in the silence of the kitchen, trying to process what had just happened. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe things were changing. Maybe, just maybe, she could have a life beyond this mansion. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, she was willing to find out. The days that followed were strange for Nia. She had never imagined a life like this, where someone like Dominic Romano, a man who controlled so much, could care about someone like her. It was unsettling to feel cared for in a way that was foreign, almost uncomfortable. But at the same time, it was a relief. The doctor Dominic had arranged for her to see had been kind, and Nia had listened, despite her reluctance. She had always taken care of others, always put herself last, but now, she found herself in a place where she was being cared for. She couldn't ignore the difference it made. She felt more alive, more hopeful than she had in years. It was almost as if she had forgotten what it was like to be human, to be seen as more than just a servant. But there was still something gnawing at her. She was afraid. Afraid that Dominic's kindness was nothing more than an obligation. After all, he was a mafia boss. The world he lived in was cold, ruthless, and unforgiving. She wasn't naive enough to think he was doing this out of genuine concern. Perhaps he was just fulfilling some duty, something expected of him. She couldn't let herself get too close, couldn't let herself hope too much. She had seen how things could turn on a dime. One moment, everything could seem fine, and the next, you could be discarded, forgotten. It wasn't a life she wanted to risk, not when she had worked so hard to keep her head down, to survive. But then, one evening, as she was finishing up her chores in the kitchen, Dominic appeared again. This time, his presence was different. There was something softer in his demeanor, something less intimidating. He wasn't the cold, calculating mafia boss she had always known. He was just a man who had cared about what had happened to her, a man who had given her a chance when no one else had. Nia, he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. I've been thinking. Nia looked up, startled by the sudden conversation. She hadn't expected him to approach her again, let alone initiate a discussion. I want you to know that you don't have to feel like you're alone in this anymore. I know it's not easy, but I'm not going to stand by and let you suffer in silence. She felt a lump form in her throat, but she quickly swallowed it down. She didn't want to appear weak in front of him. You deserve more than this life, Nia. I can give you more, he continued, his words hanging in the air between them. Nia didn't know how to respond. Could she really believe him? Could she trust that this wasn't just a fleeting act of kindness? She had spent so long hiding behind the walls she had built that it was difficult to imagine a different life, one where she wasn't invisible. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now, Dominic said, as if reading her thoughts. But I want you to know that there's more for you than just this. I'm giving you a chance. It's up to you what you do with it. The weight of his words settled in her chest. She had never been given a choice like this before. There was always someone else deciding her fate, telling her where she belonged, what her worth was. But now, Dominic was offering her a choice, a chance at something different, a chance to be seen. She didn't know what that meant for her future, but in that moment, for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. And maybe, just maybe, she could finally step out of the shadows. I didn't know what to expect next. Dominic had given me an opportunity, but the weight of his words lingered in the air, making it hard for me to breathe. It was a chance to escape everything I had known, but was I ready for it? Was I ready to leave behind the life I had built, however small and silent it may have been? The decision was daunting. I had always kept my head down, lived in the shadows, doing what was asked of me, never questioning. But now, with Dominic's offer hanging in the balance, I realized just how much I had been holding myself back. My heart raced as I thought about what he had said. You deserve more than this life. His words echoed in my mind, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself wondering if he was right. Could I really deserve more? Could I really change my life? But there was something inside me, something small yet powerful, that began to stir, a desire, a flicker of hope. It was a feeling I had buried for so long, a feeling that had been crushed by years of silence and fear. But now, standing on the edge of this decision, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to make a choice. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts swirling. I thought about everything that had led me to this point. The years of hardship, the bruises I had hidden, the loneliness I had endured. But I also thought about Dominic. For the first time, I saw him in a different light. He wasn't just the Mafia boss, the feared leader of a criminal empire. He was a man who had seen me, truly seen me. He had offered me a choice, something no one had ever done. He had offered me a chance to live differently, to be more than just a maid, to be more than just a shadow in the background. I couldn't ignore that. I couldn't let it slip away. The next day, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. The decision had been made. I would take the chance. I would step out of the shadows and into a new life. It wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. There were still so many things I didn't understand, so many uncertainties ahead. But for the first time, I felt like I had control. For the first time, I felt like I mattered. I went about my work with a new resolve, my movements more purposeful, my steps more confident. As I worked in the kitchen, I could feel the change within me. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I was taking charge of my own future. As the days passed, Dominic kept his promise. He ensured I had everything I needed, the resources, the support, to take the next step. He didn't push me. He gave me the time and space to figure things out on my own. But the more I saw his actions, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the kindness he had shown me. It was about him giving me the power to make my own choices. That was something I had never had before. And in that moment, I realized that maybe the real change wasn't just in what Dominic had offered me, but in what I was willing to accept for myself. I was ready to take control of my life, ready to break free from the past, and ready to step into a future I never thought was possible. It was a new beginning, and for the first time, I believed that anything was possible. As the weeks passed, Nia adjusted to the new reality she had stepped into. The shift was subtle at first, like the slow unfolding of a flower after a long winter, but it was undeniable. She no longer moved through the mansion as a ghost, doing her work in silence, unnoticed. Now, she carried herself with a quiet confidence, an inner strength that had been awakened by Dominic's kindness and his unwavering belief that she deserved more. The work hadn't changed, but the way she approached it had. She moved through the rooms with purpose, her shoulders a little straighter, her steps a little firmer. The quiet whispers of the other staff members, the ones who had once treated her as invisible, now seemed to fade into the background. She no longer cared what they thought. What mattered was that she was living her truth, not hiding in the shadows. But despite the changes, there was still a nagging feeling in her chest. Was she really ready for all this? The life Dominic was offering her was nothing like the one she had known. It was uncertain, filled with risks and unknowns, and that frightened her. She wasn't used to making choices for herself. She had always done what was expected, always lived within the lines of what was safe and comfortable. But now, for the first time, she was being asked to take a step into the unknown, to believe in herself and the future that could be hers. One evening, as she worked late in the kitchen, Dominic appeared again. This time, there was something different in the air, something more serious in his expression. Nia's heart skipped a beat, unsure of what to expect. "Nia," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight of something she couldn't place. "I need to talk to you." Her heart began to race, and for a moment, she wondered if she had done something wrong. But Dominic's next words immediately put her at ease. I've been thinking about what's next for you, he continued. I want to make sure you're not just surviving, but living. I want to help you build the life you deserve. Nia blinked, taking in his words. I don't know what that looks like, she said quietly, unsure of how to express the uncertainty that weighed on her heart. I've never had the chance to think about it before. Dominic gave her a soft smile, his eyes full of understanding. That's okay. But now you do. You have the power to shape your future, Nia. You don't have to stay in this world, this life, if it's not what you want. His words were like a light shining through the fog, and for the first time, Nia felt a sense of clarity. She had always been defined by her circumstances, by the expectations placed on her. But Dominic was offering her a way out, a chance to create something new, something better. She didn't know what that future would look like, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't stay where she was, stuck in the shadows of her past. I want to take that chance, Nia said, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of her decision. I'm ready to change my life. Dominic nodded, his expression soft but resolute. Good. Because I believe in you, Nia. And I'm not going to let you walk this path alone. His words hit her like a wave, and she felt something deep inside her shift, as if a lock had been turned and the door to a new life had been opened. For the first time, she felt like she had the freedom to choose her own path, to step away from the life that had defined her for so long. It wasn't going to be easy, she knew that. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome. But with Dominic's support, she felt like anything was possible. As she looked into his eyes, she realized something else. She wasn't just changing her life. She was changing who she was, who she had always been. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally becoming the person she had always been meant to be. It had been a few weeks since Nia made the decision to change her life. Each day felt like a step towards something new, something unknown. She had moved out of the small room she had always occupied in the mansion, into a new space that Dominic had arranged for her. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The walls, once so bare, now held a few pictures, little trinkets she had picked up over the years, things that made her feel like she had control over something in her life. Dominic had kept his promise. He wasn't just offering words, he was offering action. He had put plans in motion, helped her secure a future outside of the mansion, a life where she could stand on her own 2 feet, free from the shadows of the past. But as much as she appreciated his support, there was a lingering feeling of uncertainty. Was she really ready to leave everything behind? Every time she thought about it, her mind raced. She had never been in control of her own life before. She had always been told where to go, what to do, and how to behave. But now, with Dominic's support, she had the freedom to make her own choices. The future was hers to shape. One evening, as she sat in her small apartment, organizing a few of the papers Dominic had given her about job opportunities, there was a knock at the door. She didn't have to guess who it was. She knew Dominic's knock well by now. She stood up and opened the door. He was standing there, his usual calm demeanor in place, but there was something in his eyes, something softer, something that made Nia's heart skip a beat. How's everything going? He asked, stepping inside. Good, Nia replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Just sorting through some things. He looked around the small space, his gaze taking in the little changes she had made. There was a quiet approval in his eyes, though he said nothing. You know, Nia, he began, his voice gentle. You've come a long way. The words caught her off guard. She had never been told that before. No one had ever noticed the quiet progress she had made, the small victories she had achieved. Thank you, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm just trying to do what's best for me now. Dominic stepped closer, his presence comforting yet powerful. You're doing great, he said, his tone filled with sincerity. But I also know that it's not easy. This is a big change. I want you to know that you don't have to do it alone. Nia met his gaze, feeling a sense of warmth in his words. For the first time, she realized that he wasn't just helping her because he felt obligated to. He was genuinely invested in her future. You've got this, he added, giving her a reassuring smile. You're stronger than you think. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at her one last time. And remember, Nia, I'm here. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. She nodded, a quiet thank you on her lips. He gave her one last glance before walking out, leaving her with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The moment Dominic left, Nia stood there for a few seconds, absorbing what had just happened. She wasn't sure how she had gotten so lucky, how she had found someone who believed in her, but she knew that this was her chance. This was her time to step into the life she had always dreamed of, the life she had only dared to imagine in the past. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be struggles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer going to let fear control her. She was going to take control of her own life, and she was going to do it on her own terms. It was a new beginning, and for the first time, she felt like she could finally be the person she had always been meant to be. Weeks passed, and Nia's life began to take on a new rhythm. Each day was a small victory, a step closer to the life she had always dreamed of. She spent less time in the mansion, more time focused on her new apartment, her new job, her new future. The city outside her window had become less intimidating, more like a canvas, waiting for her to paint her own picture. Dominic had kept his word, staying true to his promises. He had helped her find a job, one that paid well enough to support herself and allowed her the freedom she had never experienced before. The work was different from what she was used to, but in some ways, it felt liberating. No longer was she just a maid, cleaning after others, hiding in the shadows. She was building something for herself, and for the first time, she was proud of the work she was doing. But even with everything going right, there were moments when doubt crept in. The life she had left behind wasn't easy to forget. She had spent so many years in survival mode that sometimes, even in the quiet of her apartment, she would catch herself holding her breath, waiting for the next crisis to appear. She was afraid that the life she was building might crumble, that she might lose everything again. But every time those fears surfaced, she reminded herself of what she had already accomplished. She was stronger now, and with Dominic's support, she knew that she didn't have to face those fears alone. One afternoon, as she sat at her small kitchen table, working on a report for her new job, there was a knock on the door. She didn't have to guess who it was. She had come to recognize the rhythm of Dominic's visits. He didn't show up often, but when he did, it was always with purpose. She opened the door, her heart beating a little faster. Dominic stood there, looking as composed as ever, but there was something in his eyes that made her pause. "I wanted to check on you," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "How's everything going?" Nia smiled softly, her eyes meeting his. "It's going well," she said, though she could tell he wasn't just asking about her work. He was asking about her life, about her. "I'm adjusting. It's different, but it's good. I feel like I'm finally starting to get the hang of things." Dominic's gaze softened, and for a moment, there was silence between them. He stepped inside, looking around the small apartment. Nia had done her best to make it feel like home, to make it feel like her space. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. "I'm proud of you," Dominic said, his voice sincere. "You've come a long way, Nia." She felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that until now. She had spent so long doubting herself, questioning if she was worthy of any of this. But Dominic's words were a balm to that uncertainty. "Thank you," she whispered, the words catching in her chest. "I couldn't have done it without your help." Dominic gave a small nod, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. "You've done the hard work, Nia. I just gave you the opportunity. The rest was all you." His words warmed her heart. She didn't need to hear anything else. She had spent her entire life thinking she wasn't capable, but now, she could see it for herself. She was capable. She was more than what she had been. "You've got this," he added, his voice reassuring. "You're exactly where you need to be." As he turned to leave, Nia stood in the doorway, watching him go. She felt a surge of gratitude, but also a deep sense of peace. She was no longer the woman she had been when she first walked into that mansion all those months ago. She had changed, and for the first time, she knew that the future was hers to shape. With each step forward, she was carving out a life that was hers alone, free from the shadows of her past. The fear, the doubt, they were still there, but they no longer controlled her. She controlled them. And with that realization, Nia knew that she had finally stepped into the life she was always meant to live. Months went by, and Nia's new life began to feel more like her own, a life she could claim with pride. She had settled into a routine that allowed her to focus on her goals, her dreams. The uncertainty that once gripped her heart slowly faded. replaced by a growing sense of self-worth. She had become more than just a woman in the shadows, more than the maid who went unnoticed by the world. Nia had stepped into her power, and with each passing day, that power grew stronger. Dominic had kept his promise to her, not just in words, but in actions. He had given her the resources, the opportunities, and the support she needed to build a future that was hers. She no longer worked under the weight of fear, but with a sense of purpose. Her job was rewarding, not just financially, but emotionally. She was now surrounded by people who respected her, who saw her as more than just a maid. She had earned their trust, and with it, her confidence soared. But even as everything seemed to fall into place, there was still a part of Nia that held on to the past. She had been through so much, and the scars, both visible and invisible, still lingered. She had learned to hide them, but they were still there, reminders of the woman she used to be. One evening, as she sat in her apartment reflecting on how far she had come, there was a soft knock at the door. Nia wasn't surprised. She had grown accustomed to Dominic's visits, though he had been less frequent in recent weeks. She opened the door to find him standing there, his familiar presence offering a sense of comfort. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, his voice warm. Nia smiled and stepped aside, letting him in. As he entered, his eyes quickly scanned the room, taking in the small but meaningful changes she had made. "It's good to see you doing so well," he said, his gaze meeting hers with a quiet approval. Nia nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I'm getting there," she said softly. "Still learning to trust that I can keep moving forward." Dominic looked at her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. He could see the progress she had made, but he also saw the uncertainty that still lingered in her. "You've come so far, Nia," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "But don't be afraid of the future. You've earned it. You've earned the right to step into it with your head held high." Nia's heart fluttered at his words, but she wasn't sure if she could believe them. She had spent so much of her life doubting herself, unsure if she was deserving of the opportunities that had come her way. But Dominic's belief in her had always been unwavering, and it had started to change how she saw herself. "I've always been afraid of what's next," Nia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that I might fail, that I might fall back into the life I had before." Dominic stepped closer, his presence calming. "You won't," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here, Nia, and you've proven that you're capable of more than you ever gave yourself credit for." Nia looked into his eyes, feeling the weight of his words. There was something in the way he spoke, something that told her he truly believed in her. It was a rare feeling, one that had been missing from her life for so long. She had never had someone believe in her like this before. And for the first time, Nia allowed herself to believe it too. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know where I would be without you." Dominic smiled, the warmth in his eyes undeniable. "You've always had it in you, Nia. You just needed to see it for yourself." As he turned to leave, he paused at the door, giving her one last look. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, and with that he was gone. Nia stood there for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. For the first time, she truly understood what it meant to be free, to be in control of her own life. It wasn't about escaping her past. It was about embracing the future, the one she had built with her own two hands. And with that realization, Nia knew that nothing could hold her back. The life she had once dreamed of was no longer just a dream. It was her reality.